How'd that feel to you? Pretty good? Yeah, that was a good one. I know it sounds crazy, but sometimes I get sucked into those meditations and I take off just like you guys do too. It's just I got to come back and I have to talk, and sometimes I find that to be a little bit like, whoa, oh yeah, okay, we got to do this thing now, right? Anyways, fun stuff. So the last time we got together, we talked about going beyond. And while this year what I did was I challenged people to think about this idea of where are you at spiritually in your own growth and development. And then I challenged you to think about this idea of going beyond. And as I started contemplating that, what that could possibly look like for you, I started thinking about this idea that, like, be careful with this idea of going beyond, because if you're not careful, you can fall in the trap that says something along the lines of, well, I'm not quite there yet, I haven't arrived. And what I want to talk about today is this idea that, or the understanding that there really is no destination. When you start the spiritual path, the spiritual journey, actually, the destination is great books. You hear all this stuff. We think about the story of Jesus and how he lived his life, and then he became awakened and he got on the cross, and then we think, wow, that's it. It's living in this awakened state, and it was everything else like that. And to me, as I start to live this stuff and have fun with it and play with my own spiritual journey, what's come loud and clear to me is it's really not a destination. In other words, you're never done. There's always another layer to the onion, as the saying goes, right? And I really have been playing with this stuff, this idea of don't make it about the destination. You already are. Even if you don't understand it yet, you are already divine. You are already perfect, whole, and complete. You lack nothing. The only thing we got to do is kind of clean up some stuff that's going on between and up here. But trust me when I tell you, God's not looking at you and going, man, we got some work to do. That's just not the way it works. No, the truth is God's looking at you and saying, beautiful, holy, sacred child, not holding anything back. And the truth is, the only thing that's holding us back is ourselves, because of the labels that we have believed over our lifetimes and the previous lifetimes and generations and generations and generations. And that's been passed down over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And so this idea of going beyond, while I'm excited about it, and we're going to talk about it today, what I think would be really fun to play with this year, underneath all of that, I just want you to remember, it's not about arriving anything. And it's not like you all of a sudden get to this point and it's like, okay, well, there's the finish line. The truth is, it's already happening right here and right now in this moment. It's about the journey. It's about this understanding that you're the spirit, this ever-expanding spirit. And this idea that spirit is always evolving, it's always moving forward. There's always an expansion, always an expansion. When you start to feel that, when you start to understand that, then you take the pressure off of yourself. Well, wait a minute, why don't I look like this person? Or why don't I do it like that person? Or how come it doesn't look like this? How many people do that? Right? I think we all do. Especially when we first get started on this journey. We go out, we read all the books, we read about all the tools, we do all, right? That's kind of what the gig is. Because we don't know, so we're trying to figure it out. And that's necessary and that's good. It is. I'm not knocking any of that. Believe me, I've got, you people that know me know I've got hundreds of books. Hundreds, thousands at this point in time, because I love this stuff. I love playing with it. But you know, there's something inside of me that's going, Yes, all of that's true. Yes, all of it's good. But my God, how sacred this moment right here is, right here, right now. This idea that in this moment I can stand here, just slow down. There's nothing missing. Nothing is missing right here, right now. I'm standing here, I'm looking at these beautiful faces, these beautiful souls. Glance out the window, it's gorgeous, beautiful, snow's falling. And I'm not missing anything. And neither are you. Nothing. You don't have to do anything because of who and what you are. Nothing is missing. Nothing. And so this idea of arriving, as we start to talk about this journey for this following year, just remember that. Because we're going to be doing some stuff and talking about some stuff, and I just don't want anyone to get lost in this idea that at any point in time, it's just a matter of slowing down. It's just a matter of tuning into your heart and turning off your brain and just remembering, oh yeah, love's here. Because love is always here. God is always here. Always. Right? And so we talk about this idea of going beyond. And one of the things that I've been studying lately because it's fascinating to me, and by the way, this building has some tradition, and this area has some tradition, some Native American tradition. And I've really been looking at some of the other indigenous tribes as well, because there's something about them that's calling to me on my own journey. And I find it fascinating because, to me, all of them have this piece of nature, and nothing connects me to my divinity faster. Nothing grounds me faster than for me to go take a walk in the woods. Instantly. I can be having the world's worst day, and I can just walk outside, because I happen to live out in the country now, and we've got these beautiful pine trees and this trails, and I go out for a walk in there, and I'm telling you, I just melt. I just melt. And so there's something really powerful that happens in nature. And when you can really tap into it, you start to understand the power behind it. There's a wisdom behind nature. And I think a lot of the indigenous tribes knew that. They just observed nature. And what were some of the things they observed about nature? Well, in the first place, what they noticed was nature never stops being nature. And I know that sounds silly, but think about it for a minute. When you look outside, you see what? It's snowing, it's, doing what it's doing. And in a few hours, especially if you live in Michigan, God only knows, it could be 70 degrees and sunny outside, right? We just never know. But nature never stops. There is a rhythm to it. My experience with nature, especially if you're paying attention, it seems to be either going in an expansion or a contraction. That's just what nature does. I tie it into the breath, right? When you breathe, guess what happens? Expansion, contraction. It never stops. Never. It continuously is moving. And I often hear people say, well, I just feel like I'm stuck. Anybody ever say that to themselves? I just feel stuck, right? Yeah. I understand that thought, but just understand the truth is, even if it seems like things are slowing down, you're still moving in a direction. And I would also suggest, if you honestly feel like you're stuck, you might want to slow down for a minute and just ask your spirit, like, hey, what is going on? Because maybe there's something that you're needing to learn that you're just not willing to look at. And maybe that's why you're stuck. Maybe not. I don't have the answers for everybody, but that's been my observation for myself when I feel stuck, right? So we're expanding, we're contracting. We're expanding, we're contracting. The other thing I learned about nature is it has cycles, right? especially when you live in a place like Michigan, you can really see the cycles. And each one of those cycles, each one of those parts of the cycles has a purpose. And what I've observed, especially when you start studying this, is if you can understand what the cycles are, then all of a sudden you can understand where you're at within those cycles, and you can use that knowledge, that understanding, that wisdom to your advantage. Because what happens is if you don't know that, what feels like is going on in your life, we have a tendency to judge ourselves, to judge the situation, to judge the people, to judge everything else that's going on outside of ourselves. That's what our tendency is to do. Anybody ever do that? Ever? Good. I'm glad I'm not the only one. Right? So that's what happens. So we have a tendency to look out, and we have a tendency to judge a bunch of stuff, whereas if you just understood, oh, I get it. Like, I'm just going through these things I need to go through in this life to expand my own awareness, my own awakening. And whatever's showing up in my life probably has something for me that I could learn on a deeper level. And that if I can just pay attention to it a little bit more and tap inside and ask my spirit and my soul, then I can learn whatever it is that it wants to teach me, and then I can get on with my life. Huh? Yeah, that's it. But we're not taught that. We don't understand that. We don't see that. We don't slow down enough. But it's there. And nature will teach us this every single time. So we get to learn these things. We get to pay attention. And once we learn them, then we get to understand what's going on in our own lives and how we get to navigate it better. How many people would like a little bit of that? Just thought that might be something to consider, huh? So there's this thing about nature, about healing. And when I think about that, I think about Charles and Myrtle Fillmore and what they did. Their whole thing came down to healing and then living their whole potential, their full potential. That's what they did. That's what all the masters did. That's what they do. They go through this process where they heal. And if you really study the life of Jesus, then you understand that as well. He went through a massive healing process. And then what did he do? He come out, and then all of a sudden, he lived to his fullest potential and shared that message with everybody. And it was for everybody. It wasn't just for him. It just wasn't for the Fillmores. It just wasn't for whoever. It was for everybody. And in case you don't know, you're included in that. Right? You're there. But there's got to be some effort. I always say this almost every single time I get up here and talk. It's not just going to plop in your lap. You actually have to do the work. It's your job, which, by the way, you agreed to do when you came down here. Spoiler alert. Sorry about that. Right? That's what we did. But this idea of nature, this idea of healing, this idea of expression, full expression, this idea of freedom is what unity was about. And then I keep looking back at nature, because when I look at nature, I also realize there's a lot of healing going on in nature. And so when I think about healing, what comes to my mind is this idea of the different bodies. How many people have heard about the different bodies? The idea of the physical, the mental, the emotional, and spiritual. Anybody hear about those? Yeah. Well, the thing that's also fascinating to me is when you really start studying the indigenous cultures. And by the way, when I keep saying this word, you have to understand this is worldwide. And there's not just one indigenous cultures, there's several that have been around for thousands of years. I'm going to argue that the majority of them we hardly know about. Why? Because they don't want to have anything to do with the insanity the way that we're living. They don't. They're very quiet. They're left alone. They live by themselves. They're connected. They are so connected with Mother Earth and the divine and themselves. And I really do believe this. Half of them would look at us and go, "Are you kidding me? Are you nuts the way you live?" Right? But there's something about it. And when we talk about nature and we talk about healing, we're talking about the four bodies. And the four bodies, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, right? And when you start to study it, there's also this common thing called a medicine wheel. How many people have heard of a medicine wheel? Yes, that's what it's about. It's about these 4 bodies. And these 4 bodies also have associated with them a direction. For example, the spiritual body is from the east. The physical body is the south. The emotional body, west. And then you have the mental body, which is the north. And then take it one step further. In nature, these bodies also represent a season. Oh, really? Yeah. So the spiritual body, spring. The physical body, summer. The emotional body is fall. The mental body is winter. And so over the course of the next couple of weeks, we're going to do a deep dive into each one of those directions because they all have such a beautiful purpose in our lives, and they represent things that we're going through. And when you kind of understand them, it just makes it a heck of a lot easier. And I'm really excited to share that with you. I can't wait to dive in and play with it. One of the things that I'm studying is this idea that I want to share with you this morning from a book that's called Soulcraft by Bill Plotkin. I don't know if anybody's familiar with it, but it's a pretty powerful book, and it has to do with these directions. And I want to share a very important point that it makes about this, because when I heard about it, I was just like, I stopped, and I was shocked because I was like, oh my God, that just makes so much sense to me. And it's this idea, what he's talking about is this idea of how spirituality really has 2 sides of it. It has this idea of going up and out, which, in my opinion, is unity. Why? We like to play with all these spiritual principles and everything. Everything's out there. But then he talks about this whole other side where we go in and down. And I want to share some thought. I want to read what he says about that. Life invites us to grow in many ways: physically, emotional, interpersonally, and spiritually. Spiritually, we can go in 2 directions: towards spirit on the one hand, and toward our soul in the other. By soul, I mean the vital, mysterious, and wild core of our individual selves, an essence unique to each person, qualities found in layers of the self, much deeper than our own personalities. By spirit, I mean the single, great, and eternal mystery that permeates and animates everything in the universe and yet transcends all. Ultimately, each soul exists as an agent for spirit. The concept of soul embraces the essence of our particular individuality. So in other words, the soul is you, the personality you call you. This individuality reflects our unique and deepest personal characteristics, the core and the enduring qualities that define our personhood. The true self, the real me. Soul is the most wild and natural that is within us. In contrast to the soul, the concept of spirit points to what all people, all things have in common: our shared membership in a single cosmos, each of us a facet of the one. Being that contains all, spirit both transcends all things and is immanent in all things. Spirit, in other words, can be thought of as something majestic, out there, something removed from the ordinary life, but spirit is simultaneous, that which infuses all and everything: the land, the air, the animals, all the people, all human creations, our own bodies and selves. The soul embraces and calls us towards what is most unique in us. Spirit encompasses and draws us towards what is most universal and most shared. One realm of spirituality turns upward towards the light, aids us in transcending our ego's insistence that the world be just a certain way and not any other. It helps us to disidentify from the commotion of the strategic mind so we can reclaim the inner quiet, peace, and wholeness of our true nature, and assists us in cultivating the blissful experience of being fully present in the moment and one with all of creation. On this half of the spiritual journey, we do not rise towards heaven, but we fall to the center of our longing. he goes on to say that his conviction grew that there was an essential distinction that was being overlooked by all of the spiritual paths. That's a pretty bold statement. After years of wonder and exploring, I began to suspect there were actually two realms of this that involve spirituality, not one. And he goes on to say that most religions omit or obscure the underworld half of the spiritual journey. Those of us coming to understand this are in a position similar to the women raised in Western religions who have long suspected that half of the story, the divine feminine, has been left out. How many times have you heard me say that? But this similarity is not coincidental. In other words, it was done very intentionally. And as we shall see, the wild, earthy, sensual half of the spiritual journey is a half that is uninitiated, the uninitiated masculine mind experiencing the feminine, and therefore as non-essential and perhaps undesirable or even harmful. How dare any man actually tune into his feelings? Ever. Can't do that. Not allowed to do that. Nope, not good. The differences between the two realms of spirituality and how they both differ from psychotherapy are the keys to understanding this process. So I want you to think about this. Everything that I just said. What it really says and what I'm understanding from this is when we talk about the soul and we go in and down, it's earthy. It's getting down to the nitty-gritty. Some people will call this shadow work. It's where we really get honest with who and what we are. And we lovingly, without shame, blame, or guilt, we don't do shame, blame, or guilt here. We actually look at the parts of ourselves that we don't like. No shame, no blame, no guilt. We acknowledge them. And then we start to work on them. Like, I don't like this thing about myself. It doesn't make me happy. In fact, in some cases, it can be damaging to me. But now I'm willing to have the courage to actually look at it and be honest about it and open about it. And then I can open it up to Spirit and say, hey, Spirit, this is what's going on. I accept it. And that's a huge part of your healing journey, by the way, folks, is to look at those parts of yourself without shame, blame, or guilt and just accept and love that part of yourself. When you can do that, then you can move past it and you can heal it. But until you're willing to look at that thing and acknowledge it, it stays in a place where it cannot change. How many people have something in their life they've been dealing with their entire life and they just can't figure it out? How many? We all do. A lot of us do. And the reason is because we won't be honest and look at it and say, yeah, that's mine. I own it. When you can do that and be honest about it, and then the beautiful part is offer yourself grace, offer yourself compassion, offer yourself forgiveness, that's where the magic happens. Because then you can open yourself up to Spirit, and Spirit can come in and do something with it. It can transmute it, and it can heal it. But until you're willing to open yourself up and be honest with yourself, nothing will change. I promise you. Do you know how many prayers I said to God, please help me? But I would not be honest and accept some things about myself that I wasn't willing to accept. What's made a huge difference in my life is that honesty and that willingness to open myself up, to look at my shadow side and accept it without shame, blame, or guilt, but owning it fully. And when I do that, then Spirit can come in and do what Spirit does. Bring us back into alignment, back into our divinity, back into our power, and let us live the expression that we were meant to live. How many people want to be there? That is fun, folks. That is what Spirit can do. That is what these people are talking about doing, is moving forward and healing and getting on with your life to live this freedom of expression, whatever that means for you. That's what it's about. How cool is that? To me, it's the greatest game in town. It always has been. I used to understand it as this thing called God up there and this old man in the sky, and if I was really, really nice to this thing up there, and I did all the right things, and I checked all the boxes, and maybe, when I die, I might get into this thing called heaven. Oh, it makes me sick to think about that now. It does. It hurts me because of how loved I am and how loved you are right here, right now, has nothing to do with what you've done or what you haven't done. Nothing. And we get to play with this stuff. But we have work to do. And so as we go forward in these weeks, this idea of going beyond, I just want you to remember, there is no destination. The journey is the destination. Just start the journey. Truth is, you already did, you just might not know it. That's the truth. You've already started the journey. A long time ago. Long time ago. That's a whole nother conversation. That's a whole nother conversation, right? So it's only about the journey, and the truth is, when you finally make this decision, like, yeah, it's time to get going, I'm just telling you, everything changes. Because of who and what you are, when you say, no, I really, really want to take this journey, I really want to go through this healing process, the universe, because of who and what you are, starts to come together, and you start seeing people, and you start talking to people, and you start reading books, and you start going to all this stuff, and then all of a sudden things start to happen and change within you, which is where everything happens. But it starts with you. Nobody else is going to show up and go, here you go. That's not the way it works. It's not. And that's what makes this thing called unity so much fun. My daughter got me these silly little cards, but sometimes they're kind of fun, right? And this one just is ironic that I happened to pick this card this morning. So it says, you'll never be free of the people who harmed you until you take full responsibility for your own healing. No matter what family you were born into, what body you got stuck in, or the weird stuff that has happened to you along the way, this is your life, no one else's. Be tender with the parts of you that are hurt and the parts of you that are struggling. Take ownership of your whole, beautiful, dented, pieced together self. If you blame someone for who and what you are, you give them ownership of you. Uh-oh. That's not very fun, is it? Focus on what you can do right now to be your very own healer. Bam. And then on the back of the card it says, your wound is probably not your fault, but your healing is your responsibility. Right? Isn't that cool? I really, 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 really love you guys and gals. This life can be fun. This life can be a really good time. But it's just this matter of this process that we go through, that each of us signed up for before we came down here. And when you grasp that, when you understand it, yes, you can come in here, and yes, we can suggest stuff that you do, all of it. But when you finally really understand it, that all you have to do is show up and start playing with the stuff and trust yourself and trust the universe and trust God and trust everything else, it's a game changer. Everything changes. Many of you are on that journey. Many of you I've talked with in classes, outside of classes, in the lobby, over dinner. We had an amazing board retreat this weekend. There's a lot of you that are doing some amazing, beautiful, beautiful work. And I just want to congratulate you on doing that. Other people are just waking up. Congratulations. More than likely, if you're sitting in this building or listening to us online, you're moving. You are. But there might be something more for you. Because there's always more light. There's always more love. There's always more grace. There's always more compassion. And then guess what happens? Then you actually get to take it, walk outside of those four walls, and be love. You get to be love to all the people that you know, to all your friends, all your family, and everything else like that. And there is no greater expression. There is no greater moment than being able to show up as love. That's the best. So, having said that, thank you for who you are. Thank you for showing up. Literally, thank you for everything that you're doing. And even if it doesn't feel like you're doing anything, you're doing a lot. It's not easy being down here right now. It's not. Sometimes it gets heavy, doesn't it? Yeah, so just being here is a miracle. The fact that you're here is a miracle. You are brilliant. And trust me, if all you do is get out of bed in the morning, you're doing a lot. And if you can do more than that, then hey, that's cool. But your expression is your expression. Don't ever forget that. It doesn't need to look like anybody else's. It's just you being you. You are a brilliant light of the divine. Don't ever forget that. Just because of who and what you are. And I am simply blown away by your presence. Thank you to each and every one of you. God bless.